Mom, from your upcoming pay, all your funds will be rerouted to my personal account. These were the exact words my son, Bryce, shared with me that Thursday afternoon as we shared coffee in my kitchen. He delivered this news with an air of absolute normalcy, as if he were bestowing a gift upon me, as if I, at 62 years of age, was somehow incapable of managing my own finances. I simply gazed at him, speechless for a few moments, searching his eyes for a hint of understanding. Why was my own son, the child I raised on my own, the man I provided for, through sheer hard work, asking for unrestricted access to my entire financial portfolio? But I found no answers, only his placid smile, the unwavering confidence of someone in complete command. So I took a deep breath and conceded, agreeing that it sounded acceptable and that I placed my trust in him. Bryce's smile broadened. He rose, planted a perfunctory, almost robotic kiss on my forehead, one of those gestures devoid of genuine affection, and declared it for the best. He assured me I wouldn't have to trouble myself with anything, that he would handle all the details, that it was for my own welfare. Those very words, for my own welfare, lingered in the air long after his departure. That same evening, a tradition held every Friday. Bryce returned, not solo, but accompanied by his wife, just as he always did. His arrival signaled an expectation that dinner would be prepared, the table set, and a warm complimentary meal awaiting them, a routine that had been in place for the preceding 3 years. I heard their footsteps approach the entrance. I heard the familiar sound of the key I'd given him turning in the lock. The door creaked open, and then I heard the scream. It was a piercing, desperate cry, the sound of someone encountering an utterly unexpected sight, the realization dawning that their plans had just been dramatically upended. I remained seated in my kitchen chair, in the quiet solitude of my home, listening to the echoes of that scream reverberate off the walls. I made no move to investigate. I already understood the situation. Bryce burst into the kitchen, his face ashen, his eyes wide with shock. His wife followed, her expression mirroring his disbelief. "Mom!" Bryce's voice boomed. "Mom, what have you done? Where is everything? Where's the furniture? Where's the television? Where is everything that was here?" With a composure I hadn't realized I possessed, I met his gaze calmly. I explained in the gentlest tone I could muster that I had liquidated some possessions, that I had a pressing need for cash. After all, if he was assuming stewardship of my finances, I felt it prudent to ensure I had some immediate funds. His face, previously pale, flushed crimson with unadulterated rage. He advanced a step toward me, and in that instant I saw my son for what he truly was, for the first time. He was no longer the child I nurtured, nor the young man I had supported in building his life, but a stranger, regarding me with a look of contempt, fury, and something chillingly akin to hatred. "You're insane," he spat. "You've completely lost your mind. How could you sell things without consulting me now? How are we going to watch television when we visit? How will we be comfortable here?" That final question, "How will we be comfortable here?" shifted everything. It wasn't, "How will you be comfortable, Mum?" He wasn't concerned with my well-being, but with their comfort, as though my home were merely an extension of their own domain, as though my possessions existed solely for their convenience. His wife moved closer, her gaze, which always struck me as cold and calculating, fixed on me. She uttered words I will never forget, accusing me of selfishness, of only thinking of myself, of them visiting weekly to provide companionship and ensure my welfare, and this was my gratitude. Selfish, I who had worked double shifts for years, so Bryce could attend university. I who had abandoned any thought of rebuilding my own life after his father's desertion, determined that her son would not grow up with a stepfather. I who had resided in cramped apartments, donned threadbare clothing, and subsisted on meagre meals so he could have every necessity. Selfish. Bryce stood before me, his demeanour suggesting I was a problem requiring a solution. Then he delivered a blow that fractured me. He mused aloud that perhaps proposing the bank account transfer had been a misstep, that perhaps I was not in a state to make sound judgments, and that I might require more assistance than he had initially anticipated. More assistance, as if I were an inconvenience, an infirm elderly woman needing constant supervision. I rose from my chair, addressing both of them, my voice emerging with more volume than I had intended. I stated that dinner was not prepared, that there would be no dinner, and that if they were hungry, they were welcome to dine elsewhere. The subsequent silence was palpable, heavy. Bryce stared, utterly incredulous at my declaration. His wife let out a short, bitter laugh, muttering something about respect and appreciation. Then Bryce uttered his parting words, the ones that still echo in my mind's ear. "You should be very careful," he stated, his voice laced with a coldness I had never before witnessed. "A woman your age, alone, with no family who genuinely cares for you, could find herself in a dire situation. I am all you have, and you would do well to remember that before making any further rash decisions." They departed abruptly, storming out of my house, the slamming doors leaving a wake of palpable anger and veiled intimidation. I heard them enter their car, the engine roar to life, and then the sound of them driving away. I stood in my deserted kitchen in my vacant house, feeling an irreparable fracture within me. Yet it was not sorrow or despair that I experienced, but something distinct, clarity. It was the absolute conviction that my son did not love me, perhaps never had, and that I was merely a resource to him, a source for financial gain, sustenance, and convenience. I returned to my chair. My gaze swept over the bare walls of my living room, the vacant spaces where furniture, acquired through my own labour and effort, once stood, and for the first time in a very long time, a smile touched my lips. Because Bryce was unaware of a crucial detail. He didn't know I hadn't sold the furniture for financial gain. I had divested myself of it to send a message, to gauge his reaction, to confirm a suspicion deeply ingrained in my heart. And his reaction had been precisely as anticipated, fueled by rage, indignant, and exhibiting the entitlement of someone who believes they have a claim to another's belongings. That night, as I sat in the enveloping darkness of my empty home, I made a profound decision. I would not cry out, I would not weep, I would not plead. Instead, I would adopt a far more potent strategy. Observation. I would wait. I would allow Bryce to believe he had emerged victorious. And then, at the moment he least suspected it, when his confidence was at its peak and his perceived control over me absolute, I would reveal the true identity of Eleanor Ellie Johnson, not the compliant mother he believed he knew, but the woman who had weathered a fractured marriage, profound poverty, and arduous labour, the woman who possessed the innate knowledge to safeguard herself, the woman he should never have dared to underestimate. There was a time when I truly believed that being a mother was sufficient. I imagined that the love I offered would be reciprocated inherently, as if governed by some universal principle that my daily sacrifices would forge an unassailable bond between my son and me. How profoundly mistaken I was. Bryce entered this world on a tumultuous night 34 years ago. His father, the man who had pledged a shared future, departed when the child was barely 2 years old. He cited an inability to embrace fatherhood, a need for self-discovery, and the assurance that I would eventually comprehend. I never did comprehend, nor did I wait for his return. I found myself alone with a young child, a modest 2-bedroom apartment that strained my budget, and a secretarial position yielding $800 monthly. It was insufficient. It was never enough. Consequently, I secured a second job cleaning offices overnight. I would entrust Bryce to my neighbour, Mrs. Bertha Washington, an elderly woman who charged $50 weekly for his care. My days were consumed by my office job from 7 in the morning until 6 in the evening. Upon returning home, I would attend to Bryce, prepare his evening meal, bathe him, put him to bed, and then depart again at 9 o'clock at night to clean commercial buildings until 2 in the morning. My sleep was limited to 4 hours, a cycle that repeated indefinitely. This arduous routine persisted for years, so many that the exact duration eludes my memory. I recall Bryce's persistent desire for the name brand sneakers favored by his schoolmates, priced at $100. My combined income from both jobs hovered around $1,200 monthly. $100 represented nearly all my grocery budget for 2 weeks, yet I procured them for him. I was determined that my son would never feel inferior to anyone. I wanted him to know that his mother would go to any length for him. I subsisted on rice and beans for an entire month to cover the cost of those sneakers. When Bryce reached 18, he expressed a desire to attend a private college with an annual tuition of $10,000. I lacked the funds, not even a tenth of that sum. Nevertheless, I approached the bank and obtained a loan. I incurred debt for 4 full years of his university education, a burden I ultimately discharged over a decade. 10 years of loan repayment so my son could earn a college degree. He graduated and secured a well-compensated position, earning $6,000 monthly, twice my earnings after 3 decades of dedicated work. And I rejoiced. I believed he could finally establish his own life, that my maternal duties had been fulfilled effectively. However, Bryce did not move out immediately. He stated a desire to save, to build a secure foundation before embarking on independent living. I readily agreed, assuring him, "Of course, this is your home. You are welcome to stay as long as you require." He remained for an additional 5 years, 5 years during which I continued both my employment roles. 5 years of covering rent, food expenses, and utility bills. 5 years where Bryce meticulously saved every cent of his salary, unburdened by any financial responsibilities. When he eventually departed, it was not to secure rented accommodation, but to purchase a residence outright, a $300,000 home, acquired with cash, a testament to his savings, accumulated during those 5 years of living rent-free in my home. I was immensely proud, expressing my pride to him, and I meant it. I believed I had successfully facilitated his journey. I harbored the hope that now, with his own property, he might offer some assistance, perhaps allowing me to reduce my workload, to finally find some respite. That, however, never materialized. Bryce married 2 years after relocating. His wife was a woman of refined appearance, the sort who consistently presented herself impeccably dressed, with perfectly manicured nails, and who spoke in a tone that, while outwardly polite, veiled an underlying coldness. From the outset, I sensed she regarded me with a degree of condescension, as if I occupied a subordinate position, as if she couldn't comprehend Bryce's origins. At the wedding, an event costing $30,000, I was seated at a rear table, not among the principal family members. Bryce attributed this seating arrangement to the presence of numerous influential clients from his workplace, who necessitated those prime tables. I feigned understanding, smiled for the photographs, danced when invited, and returned home alone that evening, carrying a peculiar sense of emptiness. Following the wedding, Bryce's visits became noticeably less frequent. Previously, he had called upon me 2 or 3 times weekly. After his marriage, his visits dwindled to once every 2 weeks. Then monthly, each occasion marked by haste and preoccupation with his mobile device and a perpetual excuse to depart prematurely. I remained silent, unwilling to assume the role of a demanding mother, a complaining matriarch, or one who failed to grasp her son's burgeoning personal life. However, they soon began arriving on Friday evenings, invariably around dinner time, always without prior notification, and always with the expectation of a prepared meal. Initially, I felt a surge of delight, interpreting Bryce's visits as a genuine desire to spend time with me, a manifestation of his longing. Consequently, I prepared his favorite dishes, meticulously set the table, and acquired dessert. Yet I began to observe certain patterns. I noted that Bryce never arrived alone. His wife was always in tow. Furthermore, their visits seemed solely focused on dining, not on engaging in conversation. They would arrive, be seated, partake in the meal, and then depart. Their stays varied, sometimes lasting an hour, sometimes less. I also observed a distinct lack of contribution on their part. Never a bottle of wine, never a dessert, never a monetary contribution towards the meal. Nothing. One evening after their departure, I tallied the expenses incurred for the dinner. $15. This was a sum I could ill afford. $15 meant I would need to work additional hours to offset the cost. It was then that a profound realization struck me. I recognized that, in Bryce's eyes, I had effectively transitioned into a service provider, a complimentary eatery, a venue where he could dine without incurring any expense, without even a perfunctory expression of gratitude. Other observations began to surface as well. I noticed that whenever I requested his assistance with a task, he consistently presented an excuse. When I needed him to drive me to a medical appointment due to my car being inoperable, he was invariably occupied. Upon mentioning that my refrigerator was emitting peculiar noises and I feared its imminent failure, he casually suggested I purchase a new one, as if I possessed $500 readily available for emergencies. I did not. My financial resources barely sufficed to cover my expenses until the end of the month. However, the most disheartening incident occurred on my 60th birthday. Bryce arrived 2 hours late, bearing no gift, no card, and offering a flimsy excuse about traffic. He stayed a mere 20 minutes, consumed the cake I had purchased for myself, not wanting to spend the day in solitude, and then departed. That night I wept, tears flowing as they hadn't in years, because I finally grasped a truth I had long refused to acknowledge. I understood that to my son I was no longer significant. I was merely a resource, an entity readily available, awaiting utilization when it suited his needs. And the most painful aspect was that I had permitted this dynamic to develop. I had established this pattern. I had never solicited anything from him. I had never communicated my feelings of being exploited. I had never expressed my need for more from him than brief visits and Friday evening suppers. I was paralyzed by fear, the apprehension that if I voiced my grievances, if I made demands, if I asserted my needs, he might vanish completely. The prospect of losing my son, even this son who scarcely acknowledged my existence, filled me with a terror surpassing all else. Thus I continued to embody the convenient mother, the silent mother, the mother whose door was perpetually open, who never created difficulties, until that fateful Thursday afternoon when Bryce declared his intention to manage my finances. A dormant part of me, dormant for years, awakened. A small but distinct voice asserted that this was not right, that this marked the precipice of something far worse. Yet even then, with that insistent whisper in my mind, I agreed. My hope persisted. I clung to the belief that my son loved me, that he would protect me, that he would act honorably. How utterly naive I was. The following Monday, Bryce arrived at my residence bearing a stack of documents. He spread them across the kitchen table, a smile gracing his lips. that now appeared altered, less warm, more calculating. "Mum, it's quite straightforward," he began. "I simply require your signature here, here, and here. These are the authorizations allowing me access to your account, so I can automatically transfer your salary each month. This way, I'll handle all your bill payments and manage everything. You won't have to concern yourself with any of it." I examined the papers. They were bank forms, power of attorney authorizations. I scanned the fine print, the sections typically overlooked, and discovered something that sent a chill down my spine. It wasn't merely access to my account, it constituted complete power of attorney. It granted him the authority to execute transfers, close accounts, and make financial decisions on my behalf. "Bryce, this document indicates you would have absolute dominion over my finances," I stated. He nodded as if this were entirely commonplace. "Yes, Mum, it simplifies matters considerably. That way I can manage everything without needing to seek your approval for every transaction. It's a matter of practicality." Practicality? The word reverberated in my mind. Practicality for whom? I pondered, but did not voice my question aloud. I accepted the pen he offered. Holding it in my hand, for a fleeting moment I was on the verge of signing. I was poised to relinquish everything, for that had been my lifelong pattern. Trust, surrender, belief. Then I recalled that Friday evening. I remembered his face contorted in fury upon witnessing the emptied house. I recalled his pronouncements. I remembered his veiled threats, though he likely hadn't perceived them as such. I placed the pen back on the table. "You know, Bryce, kindly grant me a few days to deliberate. I wish to review everything meticulously. I need to be certain." His expression flickered for a mere instant. A fleeting wave of annoyance crossed his features before he resumed his smile. "Mum, there's nothing to deliberate over. It's quite simple. However, if you prefer to take a few days, that's perfectly acceptable." He then departed, leaving the papers behind, seemingly presuming my eventual acquiescence. Sleep eluded me that night. I remained awake, poring over the documents spread on the kitchen table, a profound internal conviction asserting that this was not in my best interest, that it marked the commencement of an irreversible process. The following day I proceeded to the bank. I arrived early before commencing my workday. I requested the teller review my account activity for the preceding 6 months. She provided printed statements several pages in length. I scrutinized them meticulously, line by line, and then I discovered it. The moment I saw it, the ground seemed to shift beneath my feet. There was a withdrawal I had not authorized, a sum of $1,200 from 3 months prior. $1,200 had vanished from my account, and I had no recollection of initiating the transaction. I inquired if the teller could provide further details. She consulted her computer and relayed information that left me breathless. She stated that the withdrawal had been processed at a branch across town using my debit card, a branch I had never visited, and my card was securely in my wallet. It had consistently remained in my wallet, with one notable exception. A memory surfaced then. I remembered that 3 months prior, Bryce had visited. I was in the shower when he arrived. I called out for him to enter, indicating the door was unlocked. Upon emerging, I found him waiting in the living room. We commenced a conversation, and at some point I went to the kitchen to prepare coffee. My wallet was in my purse, which was in the living room with Bryce. A wave of nausea washed over me. The world seemed to tilt precariously, for this could only signify one thing. My son had taken my card, memorized or photographed the details, and withdrawn funds from my account without my consent. I asked the teller if there was any mechanism to ascertain the precise circumstances of that withdrawal. She informed me that I would need to submit a formal claim, initiating a bank investigation that could span several weeks. I stated I would consider it and departed the bank, with the disquieting feeling that I no longer truly knew my own son. However, I did not file the claim, not immediately, as I required confirmation. I needed to ascertain if this was an isolated incident or part of a larger pattern. I spent the ensuing days meticulously examining every document in my possession, every piece of paper, every old bank statement carefully preserved in a closet. And then I uncovered more. 2 years prior, during my hospitalization for pneumonia, my health insurance had been utilized for consultations I had never undergone, appointments at unfamiliar clinics, consultations that depleted my annual coverage, thereby necessitating out-of-pocket expenses for certain medications that year. Furthermore, I discovered a credit card issued in my name that I had no recollection of applying for, carrying a balance of $3,000. $3,000 in purchases I had not made at stores I had never frequented. I contacted the credit card issuer. I inquired about the date the account had been opened. They informed me it was 18 months ago. I then asked if they could provide information regarding the location of the purchases. They furnished me with a list: hardware stores, electronics retailers, home furnishing establishments. Bryce had purchased a house 2 years ago. Bryce had renovated that house, and it appeared he had leveraged my credit to finance these endeavors. I sat on my bedroom floor, surrounded by scattered papers, feeling the foundation of everything I had believed about my life crumble. It was not merely the financial loss, it was the profound betrayal. It was the realization that my son had been pilfering from me for years, that he had perceived me as an inexhaustible source, and that he had never harbored any intention of caring for or protecting me. I wept until my eyes were devoid of tears. Then, wiping my face, I gathered all the documents and reached a definitive conclusion. I would not confront him at this juncture. I resolved not to raise my voice or make accusations, understanding that any confrontation would be met with denial. He would claim I was bewildered or even senile, resorting to any tactic to undermine my perception of reality and my grasp on sanity. No, my approach needed to be more strategic. My plan was to meticulously gather proof, to document every transaction, and to construct an irrefutable case that he could not possibly refute. Only then would I take decisive action. On that particular Friday, Bryce arrived at his usual dinner time, expecting, as always, a prepared meal. This evening, however, I had prepared something different. I had made his childhood favorite, chicken and rice, the very dish I used to cook when he returned home from school, feeling down, a silent expression of my profound affection. He sat at the table with his wife, and they proceeded to eat and converse about mundane matters such as work, the weather, and an upcoming film. Observing them, I felt as though I was seeing them for the first time, and a realization struck me. Bryce consumed my cooking with the same detached indifference he might show towards fast food. There was no flicker of appreciation in his eyes, no warmth, just the robotic act of eating something provided without cost. Once they had finished, Bryce retrieved the financial documents once more, placing them on the table beside his empty plate. "Mum, the time you requested has expired. You've had ample time to consider this, haven't you? Just sign this and I'll handle everything." I met his gaze directly and stated, in the most composed tone I could muster, that I still felt uncertain and required additional time. His wife let out a disdainful sound. "Ellie, this is preposterous. Bryce is merely attempting to assist you. I fail to comprehend your persistent lack of trust." Distrustful? She dared to label me distrustful, and the most painful aspect was that, in her own misguided way, she was correct. Bryce rose from his chair, his expression hardening, the pretense of a smile now absent. "Mum, this is for your own benefit. You are no longer capable of managing your financial affairs independently. It's evident. Look at how you disposed of the furniture without forethought. Observe the illogical decisions you're making. Illogical. Selling my own possessions within my own home was deemed irrational, yet years of pilfering from me were not. I remained silent, holding his gaze until he finally looked away. They departed that evening without a word of farewell. I remained seated at my kitchen table, my eyes fixed on the unsigned papers, acutely aware that the real conflict was only just commencing. It would be a silent battle, one I had to win. For failure meant not only the loss of my financial assets, but also my self-respect, my independence, and ultimately my very life. The days following that dinner took on a peculiar character. Bryce ceased all contact, neither calling nor visiting. It was as if his absence was a deliberate punishment, a strategy to make me falter, to compel me to plead for his return, and to finally sign those papers solely to regain his attention. However, I did not succumb. For the first time in years, the quietude of my home no longer felt hollow. It was imbued with a newfound sense of presence. I spent those intervening days meticulously reviewing every facet of my financial history, every salvaged receipt, every bank statement, every document remotely connected to monetary matters. With each examination, I uncovered more. I discovered that 3 years prior, when Bryce had requested to borrow my identification to retrieve an urgent package, citing the loss of his own, he had engaged in more than just that transaction. He had established a utility account under my name, linked to an address that was not mine but his own residence. For a period of 3 years, the electricity bill for Bryce's home had been registered in my name. When payments were not made promptly, accumulated late fees adversely affected my credit rating. This explained my unsuccessful application for a modest loan the previous year when my automobile required immediate repairs. It elucidated the inexplicable decline in my credit score. I contacted the utility company, explaining that the account was not mine and that I had never resided at the specified address. The representative informed me that I would need to submit an affidavit and formally report the incident as identity fraud, identity theft, perpetrated by my own son. I terminated the call, gazing blankly at the wall for a considerable duration, attempting to comprehend how I had arrived at this juncture, striving to pinpoint the moment my son had transformed into this person. Sleep eluded me that night. I lay awake, my gaze fixed on the ceiling, listening to the distant sounds of the city. My thoughts drifted to all the occasions I had rationalized his conduct, assuring myself that he was preoccupied, that he had his own life, and that my expectations of him were perhaps unreasonable. Yet this situation transcended mere expectations. It involved outright theft, deceit, and a son who viewed his mother as a mere resource to be exploited without consequence. The following morning, I undertook an action I had never previously considered. I sought legal counsel, visiting a small downtown office bearing the name David Chung, whose advertisement for complimentary consultations I had noticed in the newspaper. Upon entering, I felt insignificant, almost foolish, a woman of 62 years seeking assistance regarding her son's actions. However, the receptionist greeted me with a warm smile and ushered me in. Mr. Chung, a man in his 50s with distinguished graying temples and kind eyes, requested that I recount the entirety of my story. I did so, detailing the missing funds, the credit card I had not authorized, the utility account, and the papers Bryce insisted I sign. He listened attentively, making notes on his notepad, and when I concluded, he leaned back in his chair. Mrs. Johnson, he stated, what you've described constitutes financial fraud and a breach of trust. Should you sign the documents your son is requesting, you will be granting him complete legal authority over your finances. He could deplete your entire fortune, and you would possess no legal recourse, having explicitly given your consent. These words struck me with profound gravity. I had suspected it, felt it deep within, but hearing it articulated by a legal professional made the reality undeniably tangible. What recourse do I have? I inquired. He leaned forward. Firstly, do not sign anything. Secondly, you must report the credit card fraud and the theft from your bank account. Thirdly, you need to update all your passwords, PINs, and security credentials. Fourthly, consider obtaining a restraining order if you perceive yourself to be in danger. A restraining order against my own son. The notion was simultaneously preposterous and devastating. I do not wish to involve him in legal entanglements, I admitted. He is my son. The lawyer regarded me with an expression that conveyed both compassion and sorrow. Mrs. Johnson, your son is already embroiled in legal difficulties. He has committed several felonies. The pertinent question is not whether you wish to involve him in trouble, but rather whether you intend to protect yourself. I departed his office clutching a folder brimming with forms and a list of necessary actions. I felt overwhelmed, yet beneath the weight of it all, I discovered a nascent sense of resolve. I proceeded directly to the bank. I systematically changed all my passwords, requested a new debit card, cancelled the fraudulent credit card, and initiated a formal dispute. The teller assisted me with unwavering patience, ensuring I never felt foolish or inadequate. Upon arriving home that afternoon, I was utterly exhausted, but I also experienced a peculiar lightness, as if an invisible burden I had carried for years had finally been lifted. That evening, Bryce finally made contact. His voice on the phone sounded strained. "Mum, we need to talk. Come to my house for dinner tomorrow. We have to settle this." It was not an invitation, but a command. In the past, I would have complied without hesitation, but now, having uncovered the truth, I felt only a chilling calm. "I cannot tomorrow," I replied. "I am occupied." "Occupied? Mom? With what could you possibly be occupied?" "With matters that are important to me," I stated. "There are other priorities that hold greater significance for me now." A profound silence ensued on the other end of the line, heavy with both surprise and irritation. "You're behaving very strangely, Mom. I don't understand what's gotten into you, but you need to cease this stubbornness and sign those papers. This is for your own good." "For my own good?" Those words again, as if my being defrauded were an act of kindness. "Bryce," I said, my voice emerging firmer than I had anticipated, "I will not sign anything, and I believe we need to have a very serious discussion about several issues." "About what issues?" he inquired, his voice now noticeably more alert and cautious. "Regarding funds that have been withdrawn from my account without my authorization. Regarding credit cards I did not apply for. Regarding utility accounts established in my name at addresses where I do not reside." The ensuing silence was absolute, so palpable I could almost sense its presence through the telephone. "I have no idea what you are referring to," he eventually stated, his voice remarkably controlled, though I detected an undercurrent of panic. "I believe you do know," I responded, "and I suggest you carefully consider your next statement." "Mum, you're delusional. You're confused. Perhaps you require medical attention." There it was, the predictable defense, the attempt to portray me as senile, disoriented, and incompetent. "I am not confused, Bryce. I possess all the documentation. I have accumulated all the evidence, and I have already consulted with legal counsel." Another silence followed, this one more prolonged and weighty. "You spoke with a lawyer?" His voice was now a mere whisper, laced with an almost threatening edge. "Yes, and he thoroughly explained your actions. He clarified the definition of fraud. He explained what is illegal. Mum, you cannot be serious. I am your son. Everything I have done has been to assist you." Assist me, Bryce. You have been pilfering from me for years. You have exploited me. You have deceived me. I never, he began, but I cut him short. Yes, you did, and you are fully aware of it. The crucial question now is how we are going to address this situation. I could hear his breathing on the other end, heavy and ragged. I'm coming over, he declared. We need to discuss this in person. No, I replied. You are not coming here. If you wish to converse, we can do so over the phone or in the presence of our legal representatives. Are you out of your mind? He bellowed, completely insane. After all I have done for you, all the times I have come to see you, all the times I have worried about you, this is how you repay me? All the times you came to eat for free, you mean? All the times you required something from me. But when I needed you, where were you? I ended the call then, before he could respond, before he could resort to further manipulation with words. I remained seated in my kitchen, the phone clutched in my hand, trembling not from fear, but from a potent, long-suppressed rage that had finally found its outlet. I slept more soundly that night than I had in months, for I had finally spoken my truth, finally asserted my boundaries, and though I was uncertain of what lay ahead, I knew I would no longer be the silent matriarch, passively enduring mistreatment. The following morning I awoke with a clarity I hadn't experienced in years. It was as if a dense fog had dissipated from my mind, leaving everything exposed with an almost painful sharpness. I understood precisely what needed to be done, and I knew I could not falter now. After breakfast, I gathered my purse and departed my residence. I had a mental itinerary of all the places I needed to visit, all the unresolved matters requiring my attention. If Bryce believed I was a confused, helpless elderly woman, he was about to discover the profound extent of his miscalculation. My initial destination was the primary branch of the bank, where I maintained my savings account, not the checking account where my salary was deposited, but the secondary account I had opened 3 decades prior, fueled by my aspirations of home ownership. It held $20,000. While not a vast sum after a lifetime of labor, it was undeniably mine. I requested that the branch manager close the account. She inquired about my certainty and if any issues had arisen. I simply stated that I intended to make some adjustments. She provided me with the funds via a cashier's check and recommended opening an account at a different financial institution for enhanced security. I followed her counsel, proceeding to a different bank, one located across town, a place Bryce had never accompanied me. There I established a new account, one known only to me, a sanctuary where my funds would remain undiscovered by him. Subsequently, I visited the utility company. I presented all the documents, meticulously prepared with Mr. Chung's assistance, the affidavit, a duplicate of my identification, and proof that I had never resided at the address associated with the account. The representative meticulously reviewed everything and informed me that an investigation would be initiated, that the account would either be transferred to the rightful owner or terminated, and that I would be absolved of further responsibility. It felt as though an invisible burden had been lifted from my shoulders. My next stop was the credit bureau. I requested a comprehensive report of my credit history, eager to uncover any further clandestine actions Bryce might have taken behind my back. The employee handed me a substantial document. I settled into the waiting area and meticulously reviewed it, page by page. To my dismay, I found another undisclosed matter, a personal loan of $5,000 obtained under my name 2 years prior. This loan had not been fully repaid and had subsequently been sent to collections. $5,000. The familiar surge of anger rose in my throat like bile. I meticulously marked each instance of fraudulent activity with a highlighter. With clear, decisive handwriting, I completed the dispute forms one by one. By the time I exited that office, it was nearing 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I had not consumed anything since breakfast, yet hunger was absent. I was sustained by something far more potent, a sense of purpose. My next visit was to the residence of my neighbor, Mrs. Bertha Washington. At 70 years old, she had resided in the apartment building for longer than I had. We had been close friends for decades, though our connection had waned in recent years, my focus having been so intensely concentrated on Bryce and the strained relationship that I had neglected other vital connections. I knocked on her door. She opened it with an expression of surprise. "Ellie, what a pleasant surprise. Come in, please, come in." We proceeded to her living room. She graciously offered me coffee, which I accepted. As we sat, she regarded me with those wise eyes that had witnessed so much of life. "You seem different," she remarked. "I cannot quite place it, but there is an undeniable change about you." And then I confided everything. I spoke of Bryce, the financial exploitation, the betrayal, and every revelation I had uncovered. I spoke for nearly an hour without pause, and she listened without interruption, occasionally nodding, her expression a blend of sadness and what appeared to be profound understanding. When I concluded, she sighed deeply. "Ellie, I sensed something was amiss. I observed it every Friday when he visited, the way he treated you, as if you were merely a service provider. But I refrained from commenting as it was not my place. I am, however, deeply pleased that you are finally acknowledging the truth." She gently took my hand. Her fingers were cool, but her grip was firm. "I need to ask a favor," I said. "I need you to serve as my witness. Should Bryce appear and attempt to assert that I am disoriented or senile, I need you to corroborate that such claims are unfounded and that I am in full possession of my faculties." Without hesitation, she nodded. "Of course, and more than that, if you ever feel unsafe in your home or require a place to stay, my door is always open." Those words resonated with such profound gratitude that I nearly wept, but I held back my tears. I had cried enough. The time for action had arrived. That evening, back in my home, I meticulously organized all the collected documents, placing them into a substantial folder. I made duplicates of every item, secured the originals in a safe repository, and kept the copies readily accessible in the folder. Should any misfortune befall me, or should Bryce attempt any drastic measures, evidence would be available. I also composed a letter, a detailed account of my discoveries and Bryce's transgressions, sealing it in an envelope with instructions for its opening only in the event of an emergency. I entrusted this letter to Mrs. Bertha for safekeeping. I was preparing myself like a seasoned general before a crucial engagement, fully aware that Bryce would not relinquish this conflict easily. I anticipated his arrival, his attempts at manipulation, his efforts to sow doubt. However, I was no longer the same woman I had been merely 2 weeks prior. That woman had ceased to exist the night Bryce issued his veiled threats in my own kitchen. The woman I had become was fundamentally altered, stronger, clearer-minded, and resolute. On Wednesday afternoon, as I was preparing tea, I heard a vehicle pull up in front of my building. Peering out the window, I saw Bryce's car. He emerged alongside his wife, their expressions conveying a palpable sense of determination. They were here to confront me. I took a deep, steadying breath, set aside my teacup, and waited. The doorbell rang, once, twice, then a third time, each ring more insistent than the last. I opened the door but did not invite them inside. I stood on the threshold, blocking their entry. "We need to talk," Bryce stated, his voice devoid of any warmth, carrying a hard edge. "I am listening," I replied. "Inside, Mom. We are not going to converse in the hallway." "Whatever you have to say, you can say it here," his wife scoffed. "This is preposterous, Ellie. Cease this charade as if we were adversaries. You are not adversaries, I countered. Adversaries are at least forthright about their hostility. You are far worse. You are thieves masquerading behind pleasantries. Bryce took a step towards me, his face flushed with fury. How dare you, after all I've done for you? All that you have done for me, Bryce, I have the records. I possess the proof. I am fully aware of the precise amount you have pilfered from me. I know about the fraudulent credit cards. I am aware of the utility account. I know about everything. He froze, his mouth opening, but no sound emerged. And now, I continued, my voice possessing a calmness that surprised even myself, you have two options. Either you return every cent you have stolen, or I will proceed to the police and file charges for fraud. You cannot do that, his wife interjected. He is your son. Precisely why it pains me so deeply, I responded. Because he is my son, because I have devoted everything to him and he has repaid me by robbing me. Bryce finally found his voice. You owe me, he shouted. My entire life I grew up without a father. My entire life I witnessed your constant work and exhaustion. That was your doing. You chose to bring me into this world. You chose to remain alone. I did not ask to be born. His words struck like a series of blows, yet they no longer inflicted the same searing pain, for I could now perceive them for what they truly were. Justifications, mere excuses from an individual who recognized the unforgivable nature of his actions and sought to deflect blame. You are correct, I told him. I chose to have you, and it was the most fulfilling decision of my life until it ceased to be so. However, that does not grant you the right to steal from me. It does not provide you with the license to exploit me. I did not steal anything. I simply took what was rightfully mine. Nothing was rightfully yours, Bryce. I provided you with everything you required as a child. Once you reached adulthood, that obligation ceased, and it most certainly was not my obligation to grant you access to my finances without my knowledge. His wife grasped his arm. Let's go. It's not worth it. Lost? What an interesting choice of words, I mused, as if I were the one in error, as if defending my own financial security and personal dignity were a sign of madness. They departed, descending the stairs without a backward glance. I closed the door, a profound sense of peace settling over me. That evening, Adam Chung contacted me. He informed me that the banks had corroborated the fraudulent activities, that the credit card debt would be annulled, that an investigation into the unauthorized withdrawals was underway, and that I possessed a compelling case should I opt to pursue criminal charges. I expressed my gratitude and ended the call. I sat in my sparsely furnished living room, in a house now devoid of a television and elaborate furnishings, and for the first time in a considerable period, I felt a sense of immense wealth. Not material wealth, but a richness derived from something money could not purchase. Dignity, inner strength, and the unwavering certainty that I was acting justly. The days that followed that confrontation at my doorstep were marked by an unusual tranquility, as if the entire world were holding its breath, awaiting the next development. I found myself suspended in an emotional stasis, a peculiar intermingling of fury and heartache with a burgeoning sense of liberation that I struggled to fully comprehend. Bryce did not initiate any further contact. He made no further appearances at my door. And for the first time in years, I was no longer consumed by the constant anticipation of his communication, nor was I incessantly checking my phone for messages from him. I found myself not fabricating justifications in my thoughts for his absence or his quietude. Yet, even though he was not physically present in my life during those intervening days, his digital footprint was impossible to disregard. A compulsion within me, something I typically would not indulge, drew me to examine his social media activity. It always felt like an intrusion of privacy, even for a mother. Now, however, I felt entitled to know his doings, his pronouncements, how he presented his existence to the world, while I privately navigated the repercussions of his conduct. What I uncovered was staggering in its brazenness, its complete detachment from reality, and the persona he was projecting. The very day following our confrontation, he had posted a photograph of himself and his wife at an upscale dining establishment, beaming at the lens with wine glasses in hand. The accompanying caption spoke of shedding toxic energies and embracing individuals who contribute positively to one's life. It was as if I were the very toxicity he needed to purge from himself, as if my refusal to be further exploited was a form of negativity he, with his newfound wisdom, had elected to remove from his existence. The commentary beneath the image was uniformly supportive, showering him with praise for safeguarding his inner peace, for establishing appropriate boundaries, and for prioritizing his emotional well-being. I stared at the screen, a tempest of disbelief and revulsion churning within me. All those individuals cheering him on were utterly unaware that the man they were extolling had been pilfering from his own mother for years. In the ensuing days, more posts appeared, each more elaborate than the last, as if Bryce were meticulously crafting a public narrative of his life that bore no resemblance to the truth. I saw a picture of him at the gym, accompanied by reflections on self-care and the importance of personal investment before extending aid to others. These words, sounding profound and insightful, were rendered hollow when one recalled this was the same man who had utilized his mother's stolen funds to acquire gym memberships and high-end athletic apparel. Another image depicted him engrossed in his work on a computer, with a caption about the dedication and hard work necessary to build a prosperous future. Yet it failed to mention that this future had been partially funded by fraudulent credit cards, bearing my name and utility accounts, for which I was unknowingly footing the bills. What struck me most profoundly was a post he shared on that Friday, the very day he would typically visit my home for our dinner. It was an older photograph, one I hadn't even known he possessed, showing him as a child. I was holding him in my arms, perhaps around 5 years old, and we were both smiling. The accompanying text mused on how sometimes those we cherish most are the ones who inflict the deepest wounds. It spoke of learning that love does not necessitate tolerating abusive conduct, and how he had made the difficult choice to distance himself from a destructive family dynamic for the sake of his mental health. Reading those words felt like a physical blow. Bryce had taken our shared history, our genuine relationship with all its intricate and painful complexities, and utterly inverted it, casting himself as the victim and me as the aggressor. The comments on this particular post were even more numerous than before. Scores of individuals expressed their unwavering support, commending his bravery in setting boundaries, sharing their own experiences with difficult familial relationships, and fully validating his fabricated account of events. Among the commenters were people I knew personally, neighbours who had witnessed his childhood, colleagues who had attended gatherings at my home years prior. All of them offered words of encouragement and solidarity, completely oblivious to the fact that the person from whom he supposedly needed protection was the very woman who had toiled at 2 jobs for years to provide him with the education he now used to secure his lucrative position. For several days I observed this digital spectacle in silence, refraining from comment or public reaction. A part of me understood this was precisely the game Bryce was playing. Any emotional response from me would be falling directly into his trap, providing him with further ammunition for his narrative that I was the unstable, troublesome mother he needed to distance himself from. However, each new post, each supportive comment from individuals unaware of the truth, inflicted a fresh wound deep within me. This wasn't due to any particular concern about their individual opinions of me, but rather the pain of witnessing how effortlessly people accepted a well crafted story without considering the possibility of an alternative perspective. The breaking point arrived when Bryce posted a story on his account showcasing the house he and his wife had purchased, highlighting the renovations they had undertaken, the new furnishings they had acquired, and the meticulously designed garden, all presented as the fruits of their hard work and devotion. There was not the slightest mention of the fact that a significant portion of all this had been financed with funds that were not his, with credit obtained fraudulently using my personal information. He displayed it all with such palpable pride, such profound satisfaction, as if he genuinely believed he had earned it through his own efforts, as if he had entirely forgotten, or perhaps simply disregarded, that each brick of that house was partly constructed on the foundation of his own mother's sacrifice and theft. I watched him live his life through these small digital panes and pondered how anyone could sleep at night harboring such knowledge. How was it possible to maintain such a facade of an upstanding, successful individual while simultaneously engaging in fraud and theft against the very person who brought him into existence? I wondered if he ever experienced guilt. If during one of those opulent dinners at expensive restaurants or during one of those rigorous gym workouts, he ever paused for a moment to consider his mother sitting alone in an empty house, having sold her furniture just to afford sustenance, because her own son had systematically plundered her for years? Yet, observing his posts, witnessing the ease with which he constructed and maintained this flawless public image, I came to grasp a fundamental truth about Bryce. A truth I may have always intuitioned but never fully allowed myself to acknowledge, and that was my son's developed capacity to inhabit parallel realities within his mind. In one reality, he could simultaneously be the abandoned son deserving of recompense and the accomplished man who had built everything himself. In another, he could rationalize theft as something he was rightfully owed, while publicly portraying himself as a victim of familial toxicity. It was a profound form of cognitive dissonance, so potent that it almost appeared as though he genuinely believed his own falsehoods, as if he had constructed such an elaborate mental narrative that the distinction between truth and fiction had been utterly obliterated. And as I observed all of this from the quiet solitude of my empty home, something within me hardened further, to an extent I hadn't thought possible. Because witnessing Bryce not only steal from me but also usurp my narrative, completely reversing the roles of victim and perpetrator in his public presentation of events, made me understand that there was no avenue for redemption. There was no conversation I could have with him that would compel him to recognize the reality of his actions. He had chosen his path. He had opted for deception over veracity. He had prioritized appearance over substance. And I needed to accept that the son I had raised and loved had never truly existed in the way I believed, or had been entirely supplanted by this stranger who could smile for the camera while devastating his mother in private, seemingly without a shred of genuine remorse. The moment arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, in a manner I had not anticipated, yet which, in hindsight, I realized had been inevitable from the outset. For truth invariably finds its way to the light, regardless of how many layers of deception are piled upon it in an attempt to bury it. I was in Atin Chong's office, reviewing the final case documentation, where he informed me that the banks had concluded their investigations, confirming a total of $17,000 in fraudulent transactions over a span of 3 years. This sum was breathtaking, not so much for the figure itself, but for what it signified in terms of meticulous planning and premeditation. This was not an error or a momentary lapse in judgment, but a systematic and deliberate operation of theft that had demanded persistent effort and commitment from Bryce. The attorney explained that with this evidence, I possessed more than sufficient grounds to pursue criminal charges. However, he also presented an alternative option that I might wish to consider before making that ultimate decision. This option involved dispatching a formal demand letter to Bryce, affording him the opportunity to return the misappropriated funds and compensate for the damages incurred before initiating more stringent legal proceedings. He explained that this was a courtesy often extended by victims of familial fraud, as they understood that even in cases of grave transgression, familial bonds complicated matters in ways that did not apply to fraud committed by strangers. Nevertheless, he cautioned that this gesture of goodwill could be misinterpreted as weakness by the perpetrator, and that I needed to be prepared for the possibility that Bryce might respond not with gratitude or penitence, but with further manipulation and denial. I contemplated this for several minutes, seated in the attorney's office, gazing at the myriad documents spread across his desk, each meticulously detailing every fraudulent transaction, every unauthorized account, every falsehood my son had so carefully constructed over the years. I realized that a part of me still clung to a small, irrational hope that if Bryce were confronted with irrefutable proof of his wrongdoing, something within him might awaken. Perhaps he would unearth some vestige of conscience, some flicker of remorse, or at the very least, a basic acknowledgement that he had transgressed a line that should never have been crossed. That part of me, still his mother despite everything, wished to grant him that chance to do the right thing, to rectify his error, to demonstrate that somewhere deep within him, the person I had nurtured with such profound love and sacrifice still existed. But another part of me, stronger and unequivocally clear-sighted, knew precisely how Bryce would exploit that opportunity. And that part understood he would not perceive it as an act of grace, but as confirmation that I was too feeble to truly harm him, that he could continue to manipulate and control me, because ultimately I would always yield, being his mother. Mothers, after all, always forgive, always offer another chance, always choose love over justice. That part of me comprehended that providing him with a private warning would merely afford him time to prepare his defense, to conceal further evidence, to construct an even more elaborate narrative of victimhood that he could deploy publicly to undermine my credibility before I could take action. I informed Aaron Chong that I did not wish to send a private communique, that I did not want to grant Bryce the chance to respond in private, where he could continue to dictate the narrative and manipulate the situation to his advantage. Instead, I requested that he prepare the necessary documentation to initiate a formal civil lawsuit, which would become a public record, allowing anyone seeking to verify the truth to do so, rather than relying solely on the version of events Bryce had been so assiduously cultivating on his social media. The attorney nodded, a look of surprise and respect mingled on his face, likely not anticipating such a direct and unambiguous decision from a woman of my age. He assured me that he would proceed immediately with compiling all the requisite paperwork, and that Bryce would receive official notification within the subsequent 72 hours. I departed that office feeling something I hadn't experienced in a considerable time, something I couldn't immediately identify until I realized it was power. The power of having made a decision entirely on my own, without consulting anyone, without seeking permission, without concern for how it might be perceived by others, or whether people would deem me too harsh on my own son. For the first time in decades, I had chosen to prioritize my own protection over that of another person's feelings or reputation, even when that person was my son. And that choice, though undeniably painful, filled me with a sense of integrity I had almost forgotten was possible. The notification reached Bryce on a Thursday morning, as Addie Chung confirmed to me via telephone. Although I was not present to witness his initial reaction, I could vividly envision the moment he opened that official envelope and perused the documents, detailing every fraudulent transaction, every unauthorized account, every dollar he had pilfered, meticulously recorded with dates and bank reference numbers that rendered any denial impossible. I did not have to wait long to confirm my imagination. Less than 2 hours after receiving the notification, my phone began to ring with an insistence bordering on desperation, call after call, which I allowed to go to voicemail without answering, as I had nothing left to convey to Bryce that was not already encapsulated within those legal documents. I listened to the voicemails later that evening when I finally felt emotionally prepared to do so. It was a disturbingly fascinating experience to listen to the progression of his panic across each successive message. The first one still attempted to maintain a semblance of composure, employing that controlled tone he used when seeking to appear reasonable, proclaiming it a terrible misunderstanding, and urging immediate discussion before matters escalated further. The second message already exhibited a different cadence, sharper, more urgent, pleading with me to call him, emphasizing that this would ruin his life, and imploring me to consider the implications before destroying my own son, as if I were the perpetrator of destruction, rather than merely revealing the devastation he himself had orchestrated for years. By the fifth message, Bryce had abandoned any pretense of reasonableness or maternal appeal. He had devolved entirely into rage, resorting to thinly veiled threats, declaring I would regret this, that he had his own legal counsel who would prove me a senile old woman unaware of my actions, and that he would fight this with every fibre of his being, ultimately casting me as the villain in this narrative. I listened to every message until its conclusion, allowing myself to feel nothing more than a form of clinical curiosity regarding how an individual could transition so rapidly from supplication to intimidation when realizing their usual manipulative tactics had proven ineffective. The ensuing days were a whirlwind of legal and emotional turmoil. Bryce, far from remaining inert, initiated his own counteroffensive. He began by publishing an extensive and elaborate statement on his social media, detailing how he was the victim of a profound injustice perpetrated by a mother he supposedly cherished, yet who was now legally targeting him for reasons he could not fully comprehend. His post was meticulously crafted to elicit maximum sympathy, deliberately omitting any specific details of the accusations leveled against him. He portrayed himself as a bewildered and hurt son, ensnared in a distressing legal ordeal, instigated by a mother perhaps experiencing age-related mental health challenges. The response to his post was precisely as he had anticipated, with dozens of comments expressing shock and solidarity, urging him to remain strong, assuring him that the truth would ultimately prevail, and affirming their unwavering support. I observed all of this from a distance, a mixture of awe and revulsion at his capacity to manipulate the narrative even when confronted with documented legal charges. However, something within me had shifted. This time, his public spectacle did not affect me in the same manner as before. This time, I possessed something far more potent than his carefully constructed words. Irrefutable legal documents that could not be distorted through emotional rhetoric or appeals to sympathy. Bryce's genuine unraveling commenced when his own legal representatives reviewed the evidence against him and, presumably, conveyed information he found unwelcome. His social media posts ceased abruptly, and the ensuing silence was deafening in its eloquence. A Dong Wu Chong informed me that Bryce's legal counsel had reached out, inquiring about the possibility of an out-of-court settlement. This essentially confirmed their awareness that he possessed no viable defense against the evidence I had presented, and that his best course of action was to attempt to mitigate the damage before proceeding to a public trial, where all the sordid details would be laid bare in publicly accessible documents. It was then that the cracks in Bryce's meticulously constructed life began to appear. Apparently, some of his closest companions had started posing uncomfortable questions after his wife casually mentioned at a social gathering that they were navigating a complex family legal matter. As individuals began to probe further, they uncovered the public lawsuit documents, which detailed the specific allegations of financial fraud. Mrs. Bertha conveyed to me that she had heard from other neighbours that Bryce's name was being discussed in neighbourhood conversations in decidedly unflattering terms. Those who had once viewed him as the successful, educated son now regarded him with suspicion and distrust. His wife was reportedly incensed, not necessarily by the moral implications of Bryce's actions, but by the detrimental impact on their social standing. According to rumours that reached my ears through the neighbourhood grapevine, significant disputes had erupted within their household regarding how to manage the situation. Bryce attempted to contact me several more times in the ensuing weeks, but I maintained my absolute silence, recognizing that there was nothing he could say that would alter the documented facts of his actions. My silence, it transpired, was more devastating to him than any angry word I might have uttered, for it signified my complete transition from anger to indifference, and that indifference represented the final death knell to any power he had once wielded over me. The final settlement was reached 3 months after I initiated the lawsuit, and its terms aligned precisely with the minimum acceptable conditions established by Admiral Chung and myself. Bryce had no alternative but to acquiesce when his own legal counsel explained that proceeding to trial would entail not only the complete public disclosure of all fraudulent activities, but also the very real possibility of criminal charges leading to incarceration. He was obligated to return the full $17,000, plus an additional $5,000 in compensation for damages and emotional distress, in addition to covering all expenses related to rectifying my credit and my legal fees. Furthermore, all these payments were to be disbursed within a 6-month period, with verifiable monthly installments, failing which the agreement would automatically be rendered void, and criminal proceedings would commence without further notice. However, beyond the financial aspect, which, to be candid, had never been the primary focus of this entire endeavour, the agreement incorporated a clause that I had insisted upon adding. While Atta Chung initially deemed it superfluous, it was, for me, absolutely paramount. That clause stipulated that Bryce was required to issue a public declaration acknowledging his commission of financial fraud against his mother and affirming the truth and substantiation of the accusations contained within my lawsuit. He fought that specific stipulation with more vehemence than any other section of the accord. His reasoning was clear. He understood the profound repercussions for his meticulously crafted public persona if he were to publicly confess that his narrative of being a victim of a manipulative mother was a fabricated excuse to conceal his own wrongdoings. The acknowledgement appeared on his digital platforms one Tuesday afternoon. It was concise, clearly composed by his legal counsel to mitigate damage to the fullest extent permissible within the confines of the agreement's demands. Nevertheless, the words were starkly presented, black lettering against a white backdrop, confirming unauthorized access to bank accounts, the fraudulent acquisition of credit cards using another individual's identity, and the commission of significant errors in judgment, for which he expressed profound remorse. The discourse beneath that publication was chaotic. Individuals who had previously offered unwavering support now conveyed shock and disillusionment, while others, who had evidently harbored suspicions all along, felt their doubts were vindicated. I observed this entire digital spectacle unfold with a sense of resolution that stemmed not from vindication or retaliation, but from the simple, quiet acknowledgement that truth had finally been articulated publicly. The initial disbursement of funds arrived in my account precisely on the agreed upon date, and all subsequent installments followed suit with unwavering punctuality. Bryce understood that a single missed payment would inevitably lead to repercussions he absolutely could not afford to confront. With that acquired capital, I embarked on a course of action he likely never anticipated. Rather than merely bolstering my savings or utilizing it to replace furnishings I had previously relinquished, I procured an airfare to an unfamiliar destination. I had devoted 62 years of my existence to prioritizing others, to catering to my son's needs, and to maintaining the futile illusion of familial connection that existed solely within my own mind. Now, for the inaugural occasion in my adult life, I possessed both the liberty and the financial means to live precisely as I desired, unburdened by the necessity of justifying my choices to anyone. I purchased a modest dwelling in a seaside locale, situated 3 hours away from my lifelong residence. This abode featured 2 sleeping chambers and an area for cultivation, where I could finally tend to the blossoms I had always yearned to nurture but had never found the leisure for while juggling 2 demanding occupations. The residence was valued at $200,000, a sum I paid in its entirety, drawing upon a combination of Bryce's remittances and the accumulated savings I had managed to safeguard in my newly established banking facility. As I affixed my signature to the property acquisition documents, I experienced an emotion I could only characterize as a rebirth, for this dwelling represented a form of ownership unlike any I had known before. It was secured with funds that had been rightfully returned through the application of justice, rather than extorted through perpetual sacrifice. Bryce attempted to communicate with me one final time after the concluding installment had been rendered, thereby fulfilling the agreement's stipulations in their entirety. This occasion I chose to answer his call, aware that he possessed no further means to divest me of assets or exploit vulnerabilities against me. His voice conveyed a different timbre, diminished, more subdued, as he inquired whether a genuine dialogue might ever be feasible, or if any prospect of a form of reconciliation existed. I absorbed his inquiry in silence, prior to articulating words I had been formulating for months. I informed him that the son I had raised either had never genuinely existed or had ceased to be at some point, supplanted by an individual unknown to me and whom I had no desire to become acquainted with. I conveyed that while I extended wishes for his peace and personal development, such growth would necessitate occurring at a considerable distance from me, as I had effectively sealed that chapter not out of animosity, but from a foundation of self-preservation. A prolonged quietude ensued after my pronouncement, followed by a sound that may have been a stifled cry or simply labored respiration, before he abruptly terminated the call without further discourse. That marked the definitive conclusion of my interactions with Bryce, for certain avenues, once closed, are best left permanently sealed, not as a punitive measure, but as a protective safeguard. Presently, I reside in my secluded abode by the ocean, dedicating my mornings to savoring coffee in my garden, observing the nascent growth of the flora I personally cultivated. This unpretentious existence offers a tranquility I never encountered during those prolonged periods of self-denial and commitment, for I finally grasped the fundamental truth that authentic affection originates from within oneself, and no association warrants preservation if it necessitates compromising one's own inherent worth. Periodically, Mrs. Bertha graces me with her presence, visiting every few weeks, bearing tidings and local gossip from our former neighbourhood, alongside updates on mutual acquaintances. She remarks upon my transformed appearance, a palpable lightness about me, a vivacity that transcends mere physicality. I now adhere to a regimen that is entirely my own. I awaken organically when my body signals readiness, rather than being compelled by an auditory alarm. I prepare repasts that appeal to my palate, unconcerned with catering to another's preferences. My afternoons are devoted to engrossing myself in literary works I had long aspired to explore, but lacked the temporal capacity for. In the evenings, I repose on my modest veranda, attuned to the faint murmur of the waves, experiencing a profound sense of appreciation. This gratitude is not directed towards material possessions, but towards the profound understanding I have attained regarding my intrinsic value. This represents my true triumph, not in the recovered finances or in Bryce's public confession, but in the profound act of reclaiming myself from decades of ingrained conditioning that had dictated a mother's worth was solely quantifiable by her capacity for sacrifice and endurance. I have come to realize that the utterance of no is an act of self-cherishing, that the establishment of personal boundaries is not an act of harshness, but a fundamental necessity, and that the safeguarding of one's inner peace is not indicative of selfishness, but of profound sagacity. My current existence serves as a living testament to these lessons, learned perhaps belatedly, but not so late as to diminish their significance. My severance from Bryce was motivated by a desire to uphold my dignity, not by a thirst for retribution. This crucial distinction redefines everything, signifying that my victory was not achieved by casting him as an adversary, but by simply refusing to perpetuate my role as my own victim. Did you find my narrative compelling? And from which city are you engaging with this story? I invite your thoughts in the comments section. Should my story resonate with you, your support via a super thanks would be invaluable in enabling me to continue sharing similar narratives. My sincere gratitude for your kind support. I eagerly anticipate your reflections on this story. The screen currently displays 2 other life stories that I highly recommend for your consideration. My channel hosts a wealth of additional content. Please remember to subscribe. Until our next shared life story, with heartfelt affection and utmost respect,